Hello and welcome to my knitting YouTube channel. My name is Juliette and today I'll be doing an everything I knit in 2024. So I know that these are some of the most popular videos on knitting YouTube where everyone shows everything they've knit in a given year, and I'm jumping right into the trend of it by showing you guys everything that I knit in 2024. So I've got a relatively small pile of things here actually. 2024 was an interesting year for knitting because in the summer I didn't get to do much of it because I was having a big house move, and all throughout summer and like the second half of 2024 I didn't get to do that much knitting basically. So I think I've actually got less things this year than I did last year. 2023 was my first year of garment knitting, so 2024 was therefore my second year of garment knitting. But because it was a quieter year knitting wise, I only knitted 16 items this year compared to 22 last year. So that's quite a big difference. And I've got a lot of unfinished objects, things that I'm still knitting up. Yeah, there's a bit of a graveyard of unfinished objects in my wardrobe and in the boxes that I've currently been unboxing slowly as I've just moved into my new house. So what you don't see here is a huge pile of mess basically of all my things that I still need to unpack, including all of my yarn. I managed to unpack all of my clothes, meaning all of my knitting as well. So I'm able to show you guys today all the things that I knit this year. Well, almost all of them. Some of the stuff is missing because either it's been gifted or it's in a box somewhere. So yeah, let's jump straight into it. In this video, I'll only be showing things that I finished this year. So anything that I finished this year but might have been started last year will be included, but I won't include anything that I've started but have not yet finished, if you get what I mean. The first thing that I finished knitting this year was the fennel seed jacket. Here's the fennel seed jacket. So it's a beautiful jacket. As opposed to a cardigan, a jacket is supposed to be a bit more substantial, a bit warmer and longer sometimes. So this is the fennel seed jacket by Florence Miller of Handmade by Florence. So I was actually part of the test knit for this pattern. I saw the jacket on her test knitting call and I thought it was really super sweet and something that I actually would have liked in my wardrobe as well, and that's why I signed up for the test knit, which I ended up getting. This was, what was it, the first test knit that I ever did for Florence, or yes, the first test knit that I ever did for Florence. And honestly, like, I never had anything to complain about in her pattern and in her test knitting process. She's a very lovely designer to test for, and her designs are just very, very in the time and yet timeless as well, which I really enjoy about Florence. So the fennel seed jacket is raglan construction, as you can see, and it's got a broken rib pattern, which is somewhat meditative, somewhat a bit time consuming to do, but because it's knitted in quite a large gauge, it was a relatively quick jacket to knit up, and I think for the test knitting period, we had either 6 or 8 weeks to complete this. So let me see actually how much time it took me to make this. It took me a month and 1 week to knit this up, so which was relatively quick. It features a raglan construction as well as a double knitted button band. All these details make it so that this jacket is very easy to wear, and I like to style it with oftentimes a long sleeve blouse underneath and some jeans and something like that. The length is also quite nice. It hits me just over my hips, which means that it keeps me quite warm. And the wool that I chose for it is actually, let me check the details. It's Gepard Garn Willia, which is this kind of DK / worsted weight yarn that's quite flexible because it can do DK and up to Aran weight, I believe. And this is just the color 01 white, held with a drops kid silk in the color off-white #1 as well. And I also chose some mother of pearl buttons to go along with this cardigan. Another interesting feature of this cardigan is that the collar here is a folded collar, which is quite kind of shallow. So it makes for a very neat look, essentially, overall. And I often like not buttoning the top 2 buttons, and I just button this middle one and let the blouse that I'm wearing underneath peek between the fabric labels, and I think that's quite a nice way of wearing this. I've worn this a fair amount, but I have one issue, which is that the drops kid silk that I use for it is honestly a bit too scratchy for my skin, and that's like a recurring problem that I had this year, as you'll see in the next garment that I show. So, I mean, drops kid silk is good. It's nice for someone who doesn't want to splurge too much money on mohair, but now, and this is something that I've mentioned in the previous podcast episode as well, is that I think from now on I want to move forward in terms of knitting by focusing on higher quality yarns and do perhaps less projects in the year, because my budget wouldn't allow me to knit up very expensive projects all the time and frequently. So perhaps focusing on less projects throughout the year, but for those projects, spend a bit more money on the yarn that I'm using by getting higher quality yarns, such as knitting for Olive or Iserier, which I still haven't tried yet. And to make sure that the garments that I actually do make are wearable and nicer on the skin, because that will mean that I get more wear out of them, so that actually the cost per wear will end up being cheaper than something that is perhaps knitted with a more budget yarn. So this and the next garment that I'm going to mention will be kind of are the things that made me decide that I should start steering clear from drops kid silk, basically. All right, so I said next garment, but I still knitted a few other things before I move on to this red jumper here. So the first thing that I knitted after the fennel seed jacket was done was actually a pair of socks, and they're DK weight socks that I knitted for the first time on tiny 9-inch circular needles that I had just gotten for my birthday from a friend of mine. So these were DK weight vanilla socks by the Crazy Sock Lady, and I knitted this with Emma's Yarn Simply Spectacular DK in the November 2023 subscription yarn color, which I get from Yarnworks, which is a knitting shop in Hadley, Suffolk. So this was pretty ordinary, very plain, vanilla sock. And it was just for me a way of practicing knitting with 9-inch circulars, which I found a little bit difficult at first because you have to get used to these very, very short needles and a very, very small circumference. And so the way you hold and tension your yarn, you might have to adjust it slightly just to make sure that you can work with those tiny needles. Knitting those socks up meant that I did get my practice in with a very simple and very simple pattern, and also a DK weight gauge as well, which means that it's a bit quicker to go through the sock and a bit easier to handle because it's a slightly thicker yarn. And so that was a great practice round, and I'm really happy with the socks that I knitted with those, and I'm gonna gift them to my grandmother. And it's somewhere, I don't have it here, so I'll leave a picture. It's somewhere in a box in my house moving chaos. So yeah, unfortunately I don't have it with me, but it's a beautiful colorway. The November 2023 colorway for this Simply Spectacular DK weight yarn was a lovely kind of grayish, brownish, orange mix. A beautiful variegation where the spots of color kind of are sparse nicely all the way around the yarn and the sock in itself. So very beautifully done hand-dyed yarn. Very, very pleased with it. I wouldn't be able to say anything about the wear because I haven't actually knitted anything with that sock yarn in anything that I've worn myself. So yeah, I'll have to knit a few more socks with that yarn, which I still have in my stash, to let you know of how the wear is. Next thing I knitted after that was the Sophie Scarf. This is actually my first ever Sophie scarf, which is interesting because I know that a lot of people end up knitting Sophie scarves at the very beginning of their knitting journey. And because I learned how to knit very early on when I was 5 years old, and it was my grandmother who taught me this. Obviously the Sophie Scarf pattern, I don't think it existed then. I think it only came out in about 2017 or something like that. Anyway, and then when I started knitting garments, and then I started following the big knitting pattern designers like Petite Knits and other Scandinavian ones, I was already, let's say, too advanced to be dabbling with a Sophie Scarf, and I went straight into their garment patterns. And then I feel like the trend caught on me, and I was like, nah, come on, like I've got to try knitting a Sophie Scarf at least once. So that's exactly what I did with this yarn that is actually, it's the same yarn that's featured as in this jumper belt, which I'll talk about later. This is the Sophie Scarf knitted in Drops Flora in the color red, which is color number 18. And so Drops Flora is actually a fingering weight yarn, so I've held this double to make the DK weight gauge that the Sophie Scarf requires. I'm not gonna lie, I've worn this only twice because I think I don't tolerate Drops Flora well. It's got a 33% alpaca content or something, and I think I just cannot bear any alpaca near my neck and against my skin directly that easily, but especially the neck area, which is often the most sensitive area whenever you're wearing garments and whatnot. So yeah, I haven't really worn this. I've worn this twice maybe, and that's about it. And that was because I was wearing a high collared jumper underneath, which meant that my neck was covered a bit more. So I was kind of protected against the alpaca inside this Sophie Scarf. Now, the Sophie Scarf itself, I remember everyone was saying it's a very mindless pattern. And I didn't find it that mindless because, you've got the edge, the I-cord edge, which you knit up as you're doing the scarf. And I don't find that very mindful because I have to count, 3 stitches to slip or whatever, and then start knitting. And also, I find that whenever I'm knitting a garter stitch, the stitches don't flow as smoothly on my needle as when I do stockinette. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but yes, I didn't find this that mindless of a knit. And also having to count the rows before I could do the increases meant that I always had to kind of keep a mind on that increase and decrease number, and therefore, yeah, it wasn't as mindful as people kind of let me to believe. But I'm currently knitting up other Sophie scarves, and now that I've got the pattern down, and now that I got used to it, so I'm on my like 4th Sophie scarf at this point. Now it's become very easy to do. But for the first Sophie scarf that I ever made, which was this one, I definitely felt like I had to be a little bit more focused than what I thought it would be like when knitting up this pattern. The next pattern that I knitted up was the little secret crop top. Now this is actually what I like to call stuff from the summer 2023 graveyard pile. So it's a pile of unfinished summer projects from the previous summer, so summer 2023, that I just kind of didn't really finish until I kind of came across them this year, and I decided that, enough was enough and I'd get a bit more progress out of them. So this was one of them. I literally just had the straps left to knit up on this one. And somehow I gave up last summer and just didn't finish this crop top. That's exactly what I did back in March this year. I finished this pattern off and then I just never wore it because I stashed it away for summer, and then summer came around and I don't know, I never thought of wearing this top somehow. This is more of a kind of symptom actually of my wardrobe, and I did actually have a huge clear out of my wardrobe while moving house because I did realize that there was a lot of things that I just wasn't wearing. So I donated a really large amount of clothes to charities, and there's some that I also intend to sell on Vinted. Basically, the amount of clothes that I had kind of meant that sometimes I would just kind of forget that some stuff was in my wardrobe, and I didn't really reach out for them because I had other favorite tops that I would reach out to a lot more often. So I'm looking forward to wearing this little secret crop top in the next summer because it is a really lovely, cute top that I could wear with a pair of jeans or something. That makes a really nice outfit. Now, this is knitted in Stylecraft Naturals bamboo and cotton. So a lovely summer yarn, very cool to the touch. And actually, this was a great choice of yarn when I think about it, because in a couple of previous videos, I did mention that I might steer clear from wool or merino wool for summer knits, because even though merino wool has pretty good temperature regulating properties, I think I just find that I would prefer cotton knits for summer tops. And so this was actually one of those examples where I did choose cotton and bamboo as a base, and I think that was a great choice. So this actually was a pretty economical knit, because I only had to use one skein and then dab a little bit into the second skein to make the strap. And so very economical, because I think one ball was maybe what, £4 or something, maybe even less. Yeah, a very cheap project to do. And also the crop top is, I mean, any crop top is very quick to do, but this is specifically knitted on 3.5mm needles. So it's a relatively super quick project. So I'm actually tempted to make some more of these little secret crop tops in the coming summer, if I decided to do any summer knits this summer. This pattern is by Jessie Designs. I really love her designs, and actually one of her other patterns will be featured later in the video. She does some very cute summer top designs that are very size inclusive. All of her patterns are super size inclusive, which I love. And yeah, I think I'll definitely be making more of her stuff. I have a few of her other patterns in my radar as well. Next up is my Oona socks. This is another one of those patterns that I started in summer 2023 and never finished until this year, when I just had a dive into my unfinished objects pile and decided to finish off a few things. And honestly, I'm super glad that I did finish these socks, because I wear them quite a bit. So these are the Oona socks by Umi Knits, and they are featured in the 52 Weeks of Socks Volume 1 book by Lane Magazine. It's a very popular pattern. I think a lot of people who bought that book do these socks as one of the first few socks that they knit out of that book. And I knitted this in Lang Yarn's Yawool Superwash in the color 22 Beige. And I used just over one skein to make a pair. So I have quite a bit of leftover from the second skein that I dipped into to finish these socks off. Now, in terms of wear, you can see that there's quite a bit of like felting at the back, and maybe on the camera it doesn't really pick it up very well, but there's a little bit of pinning as well. But I don't really mind felting at the stress points, like the back of the heel or the toes, because I actually find that because the felting mats up the fabric, I almost feel like it's better for your sock, because that means that you're less likely to get a hole in those stress points. I don't know. So this pattern features a really interesting back heel. The pattern has this, I don't know if it's called Isle of the Partridge or something, but it's a very lovely construction that uses some slip knits and the regular knit stitches, which makes a very lovely thick heel flap. And so I feel like that contributes to the sturdiness of the pattern as well. And also on the side of the heel flap, there's a garter stitch edge. Oh, is it garter stitch? Or is it actually a pearl? No, it's a garter stitch edge, which also is a lovely design feature. Now, obviously the main design aspect of these socks is the really lovely lace pattern. And I find this really, really cute when I'm wearing these socks, especially with, for example, like Mary Jane shoes, which allow you to showcase the sock that you're wearing. I find that these are super, super cute to wear with my Mary Janes. And the color is also really nice. It's a very good neutral color. That's not, a gray or a white. In fact, these socks in white would also be super pretty, but I'd be just a little bit worried about this coloration on like the heel or the toe or the bottom of my foot. So I think this beige color was a really lovely choice for me. As I said, I've worn these socks a fair bit since I finished them in March. And honestly, I really like the yarn. The Lang Yarn Yawool has a lovely, really large range of colors, so I think they're quite favored for colorwork socks. And I actually have a book for colorwork sock knitting, which maybe is something that I'll delve into in 2025, I don't know. I have a lot of knitting plans for 2025, so and there's only so much time left. So yeah, I don't know. But if I end up doing some color work socks, then I'll definitely be reaching out to Lang Yarn's Yavel as my yarn choice because they have a lovely color range and I'm very much enjoying the durability as well as the softness of this yarn. And because they're superwash, I always throw these in the washer to wash them, and then I block them on the sock blocker. And I find that that works very well for washing my socks without affecting the shape or the durability of the sock. Now, this is the next knitted item of 2024, which I feel like is one of my highlights of this year. So this is what I call my red jumper, or otherwise the Stockholm sweater v-neck, which I knitted in this really lovely red color. And this is obviously one of my favorite jumpers to look at, and it was one of my favorites to knit because it's a lovely pattern. Obviously a lot of stockinette, so very easy to knit. However, I am still kind of mitigated in terms of its wear because of the yarn choice, which is something that I mentioned earlier. So this is knitted in Drops Flora in the color 18 red, held with Drops Kid Silk in the color 14 red. And as I said, I think I have a little bit of a hard time tolerating alpaca, which is included in the Drops Flora, as well as the Drops Kid Silk. Now, the construction of this pattern, which is by Petite Knit, I should say, is quite interesting. You start off with a straight back. So you kind of do a straight edge, no shaping at the back, because all the shaping is done at the front for the neck and the drop shoulder. So you just do a big kind of rectangle of stockinette flat, and then you pick up for the shoulders and do this sloping in here by doing some German short rows to construct the drop shoulder, as well as doing the v-neck shaping at the front. And then you join in the round at the bottom of the armpits and just knit straight down as you would. And then the sleeves are constructed with some short German short rows as well to shape the sleeve nicely. And then you do a few decreases and then end with some ribbing. The v-neck was actually my first time doing a folded over v-neck with this central decrease stitch. I was a little bit apprehensive of it, but actually it was super easy to do. And Petite Knit also left some links to some video instructions, I believe. Either that or I found them myself on YouTube very easily. But overall, it was super easy to knit this jumper. I remember it was a very pleasant experience, although it still did take me 2 months to knit on this, perhaps because I was working on other projects at the same time. Again, the yarn choice is a little bit disappointing. I love wearing this jumper for the look, but not for the feel, if that makes sense. So whenever I'm wearing this jumper, I feel like I have to wear a long sleeve underneath. I've worn it with just a t-shirt before, but it's just like in the morning, if I'm trying to choose between this jumper and another, and I know that the other jumper is not going to cause me any, it's not irritation, but it's a slight discomfort. It's not that I don't tolerate mohair, I do, it's just, I know it's there on my skin, especially for the Drops Kid Silk. And so if I'm feeling like I don't want to have that stimulation throughout the day, then I'm not going to reach for this jumper. But that doesn't mean that I haven't worn it very much. I have. It's just that I have to be conscientious of what I wear underneath. So sometimes I wear this jumper with a long sleeve blouse with like a kind of slit opening at the front, so that peeks very nicely through the v-neck. And I think that's my favorite way of wearing this jumper. And I've worn it at a conference as well for a conference dinner, and that was super nice. And also it's got, I don't know if you can see, but it's got this very lovely drape, and that's thanks to the alpaca, which I don't tolerate too well either. So that's a bit of a shame. But in this case, because it's a v-neck jumper, I don't feel like I have the problems that I had with alpaca as I did with this Sophie scarf, because obviously the neck opening means that it's not directly against the skin on my neck, so I don't have that irritation that I was finding with this Sophie scarf. But overall, I would very happily knit this jumper again because I found that the construction of this jumper is really, really flattering, and I think it's like a very staple jumper. I'm tempted to either re-knit this or the non-V-neck version, so the normal crew neck version, at some point in the near future because it's such a staple jumper. It's like your basic jumper, you know? And Petite Knit has done a fantastic job at that. I know that the pattern originally calls for 2 strands of mohair, but a lot of people, including myself, have done this pattern with 1 strand of fingering weight yarn held with 1 strand of mohair. And I found that that works perfectly. And it's because like the gauge is just a normal, you know, DK weight 21 stitch gauge, which you can easily achieve with 1 strand fingering, 1 strand mohair. And so I would highly recommend doing that as well. I don't know that I would do this jumper with 2 strands of mohair only, just because I feel like I really like the way it sits on my shoulders and my arms the way it is right now with a strand of fingering weight wool. And I feel like if it was 2 strands of mohair, it might be a bit too lofty. I don't know. I've never done a mohair only jumper or garment, so I'll have to see. But I really like this jumper. Perhaps not the yarn of choice, but it's something that I definitely might want to re-knit. The next garment that I'm going to talk about is actually the one I'm wearing today, and it's the maple wrap by Handmade by Florence. I think, I'm going to say this, I think this is my favorite garment, favorite knitting project of this year. And it's also, I think, one of my most popular finished objects on my Instagram. And honestly, it's a testament of the excellent design choices of Handmade by Florence, as well as the quality of the yarn that I chose for this garment. And it's one of those things where it's like 2 things that happened really well simultaneously. A great pattern and a great yarn choice. So, and that's why this is like a perfect project, and this is my favorite project of the year. So the maple wrap was actually also a test knit, and this was my second test knit for Florence. I remember seeing this maple wrap, which was meant to be a slightly looser version of her Robinson wrap. And I've always liked the Robinson wrap, but not so much the fact that it was very fitted, because it only features about 3 centimeters of positive ease. And when Florence put out the testing call for this wrap jumper, which has 15 centimeters of positive ease, that was much more to my liking, and that's why I signed up. And it also features a drop shoulder construction, and I think that was more to my taste than compared to the raglan construction which the Robinson wrap had. And I took about a month and a half to knit this up, so a relatively quick project, even though it might seem like, because you're doing a wrap cardigan, you have like double the fabric in the body here to knit, so you might think, you know, is this going to take more time than a regular jumper? I can assure you it doesn't. And in fact, it was a relatively quick knit because it's a slightly larger than DK gauge. It's like a 20 stitch gauge jumper, I believe. It was either 19 or 20, I can't remember exactly. But it was knitted on 4.5mm needles, so that makes it slightly quicker than the usual 4mm needle project that you might do for a DK weight jumper. And I think the longest thing that took was probably doing the double knitted edges and the tassel here in double knit as well for the bow. And you can't see it here, but there's a whole rope double knitting that goes all the way around, and that was also quite it took me a fair amount of time to knit that up, because it's also the last thing that you have to do. It's the last thing that in the order of the pattern that you do. So you're finally done with the garment, but you still have to do this long rope and double knitting. And some, I mean, I found that a little bit disheartening, but the end product is super lovely. This cute little bow on the side, I love. It's a feature that I like very much. The sleeves are knitted up using German short row to do like a slightly set-in sleeve look. So I think it fits really beautifully on my shoulder and my arm. I love the feature of the slight drop shoulder. The V-neck opening, I think, is perfect, and I really like this cropped length. That is, I think, the original length of the pattern, And I've seen a lot of people do it in this crop length, but I've seen a lot of people doing it in a slightly longer version at just above the hip level. And yeah, it's just such a lovely design, and I love it so much. Now, the yarn that I chose for this pattern is also a fantastic choice that I made. And it's something that I've talked about a lot in my knitting channel as well. It's knitted up with Sadness Garn Sunday and Filcolana Tilia held together. Now, this is a really lovely combination. I find that I really like Sadness Garn Sunday held with a mohair like this. And the mohair that I chose this time was the Filcolana Tilia. It was my first time ever using a non-Drops Kid Silk mohair, and this is the kind of garment that made me realize, wow, like there is a difference in quality between Drops Kid Silk and some of the more slightly more expensive Scandinavian yarn brands mohairs. So Filcolana Tilia, actually, I lied. Filcolana Tilia I've used once before for my sweater number 9, and it was super soft, but it was done with drops. It was done with Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino, which is a little bit rough and woolly to the touch. So I think it didn't feel as nice as this, which is held with Sadness Garn Sunday, a fingering weight merino yarn. And so this combination means that you get really the best out of both of those yarns, the merino and the mohair. And it makes for a really lovely fabric, which has a lovely drape, thanks to the fact that it's on a slightly larger needle size of 4.5mm needles. The mohair always is going to give a bit of softness and loftiness and drape. And yeah, it's just I really love this yarn combination, and I have only talked about this in my channel like so many times, I think. And it was also a relatively economical project as well, because even though, as I said, there's this overlapping of fabric here, which might make you think that you're going to use a bit more yarn than usual, it was knitted in 4.5mm needles. And so I've only used, and it's also like quite a cropped look. So I've only used, for my size, which was size B, 4 skeins of each yarn. And I think usually I plan for about 5 skeins if I'm doing like a fingering weight and mohair project. So the fact that I only use 4 of each was quite good as well. Now, just to mention the colors, this Filcolana Tilia, the color was 353 Frisia, and the Sadness Garn Sunday was a petite knit color in the color of 5012 Perfect Purple. So the mohair is the strand that's a bit darker, and that's what's creating the slight marbled effect in the fabric. So yeah, super, super happy with this project, and definitely will use this yarn combination again. So yeah. The next project that I finished in 2024 back in April was a pair of socks for my mum. They were the Mountain Walk Chunky sock pattern by Florence Miller. So this is a DK weight mock neck sock pattern by Florence again. And it's a super quick knit actually. The mock cable featured in the pattern is very easy to do because it's just you use a special kind of stitch to do these mock cables, so you don't need a cable needle to do the cables in the pattern. And I also really like the feature that the socks kind of are ribbed all throughout, which means that you have a bit more give in the sock as well. The yarn that I used was Emma's Yarn Practically Perfect Sock in the color Sweet Magnolia. I held this double to make this DK weight gauge, and I actually found that I didn't really enjoy the process of knitting DK weight socks with 2 strands of fingering weight yarns. I found that, I don't know how, but it felt a bit tighter throughout and just a little bit less pleasant to the touch as well. And generally, yeah, just the tension was a little bit weird throughout. The sock came out absolutely fine after blocking and stuff. It was just the fact that I was using 2 strands. Everything felt just a little bit tighter than usual. I don't know why. So it's something that I won't be doing in the future for sure. And I'll just use a normal DK weight sock yarn whenever I have to do some DK weight socks. Now, I made these socks initially as a Christmas present for my mom, which I just didn't finish. And I didn't see my parents over this Christmas because I was in my fiance's place for Christmas. I'm only going to see my parents in February, which means that I'll be giving these socks a year and 2 months too late, basically, for my mom. So I did get her some other Christmas presents. So I hope my mom will forgive me for this. But it's a really lovely sock, and I think I'll definitely want to do this pattern again for any gift knits because it's a really cute DK weight sock, so it's a bit faster to knit for gift knits, but also interesting enough with those mock cables that it's not just a vanilla DK weight sock, right? Right, so I mentioned that this garment was my favorite garment of the year, but perhaps this is my proudest achievement of the year. So this is actually the PhD vest, which is my own pattern, and I've made two out of these, but this is the first one, which is kind of like the testing out the pattern version. My first trial at making my own pattern and writing my own pattern as well, and it was a really interesting process. So this is knitting up in the Color Mart Merino Maxi Casual 1030 DK. It's basically a DK weight wool from what's it called? Color Mart. And I used about 680 meters of this, so 230 grams. So this means that it's a project that you could probably do with like 5 or 6 balls of DK weight or worsted weight yarn. The stitch gauge is 19 stitches per 30 rows. So it's like yeah, it's like a heavy DK slash worsted weight gauge essentially. And it features these really kind of oversized armholes and the deep V-neck. It's meant to be quite the lofty kind of unisex boxy look essentially, and it was based off this knitted vest that I bought from a charity shop in Paris. It was a men's vest and I really like the look of it on myself. I think I much prefer oversized vests over fitted ones, and so that's why I designed this pattern. And or rather I knitted this for myself and I was like, maybe I could write a pattern out of this, which is exactly what I did. And it features a side drop shoulder construction as well. And I'm really happy with this first one. The color is it's a super versatile color because obviously it's like a neutral beige. And I love wearing this with a really oversized colored button-up shirt for like very kind of academia look, which is why I call it the PhD vest, partly also because I'm doing a PhD myself. So as I mentioned, this was my first sample of the pattern, and I ended up doing a test call, and then like a load of people signed up for my test call, and I was super happy about it. It was honestly an awesome experience designing this pattern, not only just for the fact that, you know, it was my first time writing a pattern like this, and it was also the community aspect that I found out of it, and the fact that so many people were willing to take a chance on me and test my first ever design. And also just seeing people knit up my design is just such a lovely feeling. And I don't know how much I'll continue designing my own patterns. I'm not really an imaginative person. This was kind of like this came out of me wanting to have another one of those vests which I bought in a store. So I'm not very much the type to kind of come up with very original designs. So I think that's how my designing will be like in the future. So if I see like something that I want, and you know, I want to if I see something that I like from, I don't know, something that was made in a store or something, or something that was made in a fast fashion store, which I don't really want to buy because I feel like I can make myself. Maybe then I'll make a design and I'll write a pattern for it. But yeah, it was a really lovely experience. And actually, I'll move on, even though this is not technically the garment that I knit after straight away. I'll move on to my second sample, which is also a really lovely vest. Maybe you will see that this one seems a little bit smaller, and it's because I made some adjustments in terms of the depth of the yoke compared to the small sample. But this is the version that is kind of what the pattern will give you in the end, essentially. Now, also there's the fact that the yarn is slightly different from the first one. So the first one had a bit more drape in it, whereas this is actually a DK weight sock yarn. So I think the nylon is making sure that the yoke doesn't stretch down over time. So this might also be something that you might be interested in if you're worried that, you know, the V-neck becomes too deep or the armholes are a little bit too large over time. Now, the yarn, as I said, is a DK weight sock yarn, which is by Market Town Yarns, which you can find in Yardworks in Hartley. They were very kindly the sponsors of this pattern, where they gifted me the yarn to make the second sample, which is kind of the feature sample of the pattern. It's this color called Stacy, which is a beautiful, beautiful teal-ish emerald color, and it's just so nice. I really love this vest, and I think even though it's like a bolder color and I tend to veer more towards neutral, I think I prefer this sample over my first one. The first one obviously will always have a special place in my heart because it's my first ever sample, but I definitely have worn this one a fair bit more than the beige one actually. Now it's a lovely, lovely tonal color, and you can see some of the kind of variations in the tone in the yarn, hopefully in the camera. And yeah, all the features that I mentioned earlier with the drop shoulder and the long armholes and the V-neck construction, all there. And I can't recommend this yarn enough actually. It's a really lovely yarn to work with, nice and plump, and it worked perfectly for the gauge of this pattern, and it's worn very well. And the fact that it's also you know, a sock yarn means that it has a bit more durability in it. So I honestly think also I only needed about 3 skeins of this to make the vest for my size, which is size D. So I think it makes it quite an economical garment to knit up if you wanted to try out some hand-dyed yarns, which I know are always a little bit more expensive than industrially dyed yarns. So yeah, a really lovely yarn to try out, and make sure you check out Market Town Yarns yarn by Yarnworks, and they also have a subscription for sock yarn, which I am a subscriber of, which is super lovely. They send out a sock yarn or yarn of choice every month in the color of the month. It's a lovely skein by a local business, which is quite close to where I live in Cambridge. So it's a lovely, lovely thing to get for yourself if you're looking into monthly yarn subscriptions. Thank you very much, Yarnworks and Market Town Yarns, for sponsoring this pattern release. All right, so let me get back to the chronological order of things and mention what I ended up knitting after the first sample of the vest, which is, surprise, surprise, another pattern by Florence, of Handmade by Florence. So actually, when I look back into this video, I realized that this was a very Handmade by Florence heavy year, actually. There's another pattern that I knitted up by her later in this year. So yeah, and also very heavy in terms of test knitting, because this is my third test knit for Florence, and it's the mixed rib camisole. Now I think that when Florence first featured the mixed rib cami on her Instagram and maybe mentioned it in her YouTube channel, it was extremely popular, and there was a high amount of requests for the pattern, which did end up getting released back in June. And so I was one of the testers. I was super happy to test knit this because as soon as I saw this garment on her, I knew that it was something that I would definitely like to have in my wardrobe. I really like the kind of almost boat neck construction that this pattern features. I think in terms of summer tops, I have a lot of store-bought tops that have the same shape as this, so I knew it would be perfect. And so it features this boat neck construction, and all the edges are I-cord along the neck, the armholes, and at the bottom of the body as well. And it's called a mixed rib cami because you've got a mix of these wide ribbing sections and these twisted rib sections as well. Now, twisted rib, you might think, ooh, is that going to be a little bit tough to knit, and especially on like a 3mm needle gauge? I actually found it really wasn't, and it was quite quick to knit this up actually. So it took me a month, actually it took me about 5 weeks to knit this up, which is super quick in my opinion for summer knit. They usually take me about 3 months to knit up because I don't really enjoy knitting in 3mm needle gauges. So, but yeah, I mean, this was a test knit, so obviously I had to knit this in a certain given amount of time. I find that test knits are quite good at making sure that I knit stuff and see through the end of a project. But at the same time, a test knit means that I don't really get to work on different things or put a project down to do some other stuff. So I'm not sure how much I'll be signing up to test knits in this new year in 2025. Perhaps if I see something that I really like the mixed rib camisole, for example, then I will try to sign up. But otherwise, I think I'll make sure that I finish my own projects first before signing up to any future test knits. So this was knitted up in Sunless Garn Sunday by Petite Knit. Again, this is a yarn that I mentioned in this garment as well, but just held on its own. And this is the color, it's a Petite Knit color called 6050 Above the Clouds. Now, I've mentioned this in previous podcasts that I actually don't really enjoy too much the feel of the Sunless Garn Sunday directly against my skin. Compared to the knitting for olive merino, I find that this is slightly rougher. And I have knitted a summer garment and a knitting for olive merino. It was a camisole number 5, and I found that that's a lot softer just to the touch as well, but also against my skin. So I don't know. I don't want to disencourage people from knitting up a garment, with the Sunless Garn Sunday, because it is a lovely yarn. It's just that, as I mentioned in the previous video, if you have this extra money to spend on a knitting for olive merino, especially for a summer top where you only need 2 or 3 balls, so it's a relatively cheap project, then personally I would recommend going for knitting for olive merino rather than the Sunless Garn Sunday. But as I said, held with a mohair, like for example in this maple wrap, it's absolutely lovely and I really like this yarn. And it's also got a very different color range from knitting for olive merino. So, this might be also something that you're interested in looking at as well and comparing those two. Now, I actually haven't worn this a fair amount, even though I love this top. I love the look of it, but I just haven't worn it that much. And again, I think this is something to do with the fact that it's fully made in wool, and therefore I think in the summer I still have a hard time tolerating wool, even if it's merino, and it has its temperature regulating features. I think I would just rather have something that's mainly cotton. And so I've already mentioned this in the previous video, but I think moving forward I'll try to make some summer tops in the knitting for olive cotton merino, which has mainly a cotton content with some merino in it for some elasticity. And I think I would tolerate that yarn a lot better in the summer. But I still have this in my wardrobe in terms of like a winter going out or house party top, because it is a really lovely top in itself. And I feel like in the winter, if you're going out somewhere or if you're going to someone's house, then it's not like the fact that it's cold it means that I will tolerate this a little bit better than if it was just the regular top that I was wearing in summer. And so that's why this wasn't packed away, whereas the rest of the stuff, the summer stuff, was packed away when I moved house. Hello, it's 16 days later, and basically in the last footage I was interrupted by the Wi-Fi engineers coming over to my new place to install my Wi-Fi, so I didn't get to finish filming this video. And then I had a lot of PhD work to do, so I didn't get around to filming the rest until 16 days later, so here I am. So I've only got a few things to show you for the rest of 2024 knitting, so I'll just do some quick fire showing you what I've made. The first one I'm going to talk about is the mini mock neck tank by Jessie Made Design, and I made this with the Fiber Fox yak sock yarn, and this beautiful kind of very dark green that veers quite dark grey. It's a really lovely pattern. I knew from the get-go that it's a style that I really liked. I own a few tops that kind of look like the mini mock neck tank, not with the whole kind of mock neck, but I did like a shorter version of it. Really enjoyed the look of it, and it knitted up very fast as well, so I was quite happy with that. Unfortunately, I haven't really worn much for the same reasons as the other summer tops that I mentioned, where I think just like I need to make stuff for summer with non-wool content essentially, because it's just too hot for me to wear. The pattern was very easy to understand. The only bit that was a little bit difficult with that mini mock neck tank pattern was the very beginning, where you're doing essentially short rows to shape the shoulder and the neckline. That took me like a second to understand what was going on at first, but then it was easy going from then on. And I'm really also happy with the fact that that pattern doesn't require you picking up stitches to do the edges on the sleeves, or the armholes rather, because it's integrated within the pattern. And so it means that essentially when you're done knitting the tank, all you have to do is pick up for the neck, which is very fast to do, and then you're done. So very kind of little amount of things to do after you're done knitting the body, which I enjoyed. Another project that I knit on around the same time were a pair of socks from my partner, which I have right here. These were knitted in West Yorkshire Spinner's signature 4-ply. I have to say, I'm very impressed by this sock yarn because it was very cheap. I think it was about £7.50 or £8 for a whole 100-gram ball. And I was able to make male-sized socks out of these with a lot to spare. The color is really cute because it's like a self-striping sock yarn. So you've got these stripes of like different colors of blue in this case that are very even throughout the sock as well. So it made a really cute design without having to worry about, color changes at all. And the pattern I followed was just a very simple vanilla sock yarn pattern. I believe I did some short row heel for that instead of the heel flap and gusset, just because it meant that I could knit this whole thing a bit more quickly on my short 9-inch circular needles. My partner has been really enjoying these socks. He said that they really kept his feet warm when he was up in Scotland visiting family. So I believe the content of this wool is just kind of like 75% wool, 25% nylon. And it looks and feels like a very sturdy sock yarn, essentially. He's worn it a fair bit, and I can see that the stress points like the toe are felted a little bit, but as I mentioned, felting is not so much of an issue. And I've knitted this with 2.25 millimeter needles, and they made a really nice tight kind of dense fabric as well. I also really like the detail of the 2x2 rib that I did for the cuff, and I made it quite long for once, just not procrastinating the fact that I need to knit a long cuff to make sure that it can fit over people's feet easily. And I'm really glad I did, because it makes for a really nice look for the sock. So this was a huge success, and partner loved it, and I will definitely be knitting more socks with this sock yarn. So West Yorkshire Spinners 4-ply has both a range of normal block colors, normal just like unicolor socks, as well as some self-striping range, with including, I believe, a self-striping rainbow colored yarn, which I'm really hoping I can make some socks out of that, because I have a pair of rainbow colored Lucy and Yak socks, which I really enjoy, and I wish I could knit myself a pair of socks that kind of look like that, essentially, but made in wool. Another project that is actually also another sock is the Petal Drop socks by Handmade by Florence. That was also a really good pattern. I have to say, anything Florence has been really, really good this year, as you can see from the rest of the video. But the Petal Drop sock pattern was actually a very nice, easy sock pattern that grew quite quickly, because anything that you do with lace tends to grow in length a bit more than normal stockinette, for example, or for example cabled socks tend to knit up a bit more slowly. So because this was a lace pattern, it was pretty quick to make, and I was able to make the whole sock using my short circular needles as well. So that was a success, because I was a bit worried that with the lace pattern I might have a bit of trouble with the tension on the short circular needles, but it was actually absolutely fine. The yarn that I used was also quite special, and I'm really happy that I used this yarn for this pattern. It's the Market Town Yarns sock subscription from, I believe, the April 2024 colorway. It's got this really beautiful light blue base with really cute purple speckles around the throughout the yarn. And the speckles show really nicely, but they're subtle enough that it doesn't take away from the lace pattern, essentially, from the sock. So that was a really, really nice choice, and I love those socks, and they're so soft. I think the Market Yarn sock yarns are 80% wool, 20% nylon, or maybe even a bit more wool than that. So it makes for a slightly softer sock because of the higher wool content, but I have been assured by the people from Market Yards that the lower amount of nylon does not take away from the sturdiness of the sock yarn. And I've been wearing those socks quite a fair bit now, and I have to say I'm not seeing any difference in the sturdiness of the sock yarn compared to my other socks that have been knitted in like standard 75-25 nylon blends. So yeah, very, very happy with that project as well, and they make for a very cute pair of socks. And then the final project I'm going to be talking about today is the final thing that I finished in 2024, which is this pair of penny gloves, and I've worn these so much already. So basically, to give you a bit of context, I got my coat stolen in a bar, and the coat contained my only pair of gloves. And so I kind of really wanted to knit myself some quick mittens or fingerless gloves to fill that gap. And I landed on the penny gloves because I already had the pattern. I've already talked about this pattern, I think, on my latest podcast episode, but just to give a quick overview, that this is knitted up in a cashmere yarn. It's from a brand called Save the Yarn, which is based in Basel, Switzerland. They essentially use recycled yarn or dead stock yarn to make these really beautiful skeins of any sort of yarn fibers. So this one in particular is recycled cashmere. It's got very, very similar properties to Cardiff Cashmere Classic, but at maybe 2/3 of the price, because this is about 12 francs a ball, which is about 10-11 pounds. And even if there's quite a high shipping cost, if you're buying, for example, a sweater quantity of this cashmere yarn, it will still be cheaper by quite a bit compared to if you were to buy Cardiff Cashmere Classic to make a jumper out of it. And I haven't tried Cardiff Cashmere Classic, and this is actually my first time ever trying cashmere, but I have to say that I'm very, very pleased with the quality of this yarn, and it made for a really, really beautiful pair of penny gloves in this gorgeous, just kind of perfect red color. And I mentioned this in my previous podcast, but the intention is actually to make a set of accessories out of this. So I've already got the penny gloves. I've got currently an Oslo hat with the same yarn on my needles, and I think eventually I also want to make a full scarf out of this as well. So I've got all the yarn I need to make those two remaining pieces. So this will probably be quite a slow project because I think I'd rather focus on knitting sweaters now that I'm back with my full stash of yarns. But I will definitely try to make this red accessory set at some point this year, if not maybe the next, who knows. So this wraps up my 2024 knitting roundup. As I mentioned, I knitted a bit less this year compared to the previous year, and I knitted a bit fewer sweaters this year as well. And so for 2025, I'm really hoping to make lots of sweaters out of stash yarn, because I've accumulated quite a bit of yarn over the year from impulse purchases or discount purchases and things like that. But I've got some really beautiful quality yarn in my stash at the moment, and so I'm hoping that 2025 will be a year of stash busting, but also some really high quality sweater knitting as well. So thank you very much for watching this video, and see you on my next knitting podcast. Bye!